Welcome to Cleovis's History in the Headlines. Today we'll be exploring the history of public broadcasting in the United States, from its inception to recent budget cuts that have passed the United States Senate. The calls for the allocation of resources for public broadcasting became louder and louder in the mid-20th century, specifically during the Kennedy administration, and this was exemplified by a speech of Newton and Minow entitled Television in the Public Interest. Federal Communications Committee Chairman Minow, in front of the National Association of Broadcasters in Washington, D.C., delivered a speech decrying the low quality of television, emphasizing the need for television content that benefits the public interest. These sentiments then crystallized into the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967. On November 7, 1967, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed into law the Public Broadcasting Act, which furthered the growth of public broadcasting on both radio and television, encouraging the production of high-quality instructional, cultural, and educational content to serve the public interest. The Public Broadcasting Act of 1967 then authorized the creation of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The CPB is dedicated to ensuring public access to non-commercial, high-quality telecommunication services. However, even directly following the creation of the CPB, threats towards funding already existed, which led to the testimony of Fred McFeely Rogers, better known as Mr. Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, before the Senate Subcommittee on Communications to defend $20 million in federal funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. In the testimony, Rogers emphasized the necessity of high-quality education for children and that public broadcasting fulfilled the need for that high-quality media in a sea of mindless, violent, and harmful content, demonstrating the key value which public broadcasting was presented to hold. It was a beacon of educational light for the majority of Americans, and this desire for public education then was materialized in the creation of PBS, or the Public Broadcasting Service, established by the CPB to connect public television stations and to distribute programming, and was created on November 3, 1969. However, the creation of PBS and legislation to fund it were not without criticism. During the early years of PBS, those within the Nixon administration deemed PBS to be filled with, quote, anti-administration or Kennedy sycophants. These anti-PBS sentiments went all the way to the private memos of President Nixon, which requested that all public broadcasting funds be cut. However, these were unsuccessful. Following Nixon's resignation, steeped in the scandal of Watergate, the next major criticism and attempt to defund PBS came in 1995 from Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich. However, this effort was unsuccessful as Republicans from rural areas resisted the efforts as their constituents saw public media as a valuable public asset. However, in 2025, Republicans have developed a different perspective. Before the Senate passed broadcasting cuts, there has been criticism from the Republican Party against public broadcasting. This differs from the party's previous support of public broadcasting, specifically from rural areas, which was once seen as an asset, as previously mentioned. The justification behind the switch is then explained by Jeff Myron of the Cato Institute. Myron describes how in the digital age, the need for public broadcasting has decreased as there's a seemingly endless amount of content on the internet. However, critics have pointed out significant flaws with this position. In response to arguments against public broadcasting in the digital age, such as the arguments of Myron, it is put forward that just as television before the advent of public broadcasting existed in a desolate wasteland, we now exist in another, which is now fueled by algorithms and profit, which shows that there is still a desperate need for high-quality public television. Secondly, most digital content does not focus on local issues, which is the primary domain of hyper-local public broadcasting stations, which would be some of the first to feel the weight of funding cuts. These disagreements over the need to fund public broadcasting then came to a head with the vote of the Senate on July 17, 2025, which saw a vote 51-48 in favor of President Trump's plan to cut $9 billion in funding for foreign aid in public broadcasting, which included $1.1 billion allocated explicitly to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting over the next 2 years. The impacts of the 2025 budget cuts have been estimated to be exponential, ranging from small rural stations to major ones, and threatening to shutter over 100 local stations in predominantly rural areas. Tim Insget, Chief Executive Officer of the Public Media Company, an advisory firm, believes that this cut in funding would induce a, quote, doom loop, which sees less federal funding leading to an inability to buy programming and even solicit donations, resulting in even more stations failing, leaving the future of public broadcasting in a state of uncertainty.
Thank you for watching our History in the Headlines episode. If you enjoyed this series, be sure to like this video and comment on what history you want us to dive into next. If you're interested in how we make our timelines, you should check out Cleovis. Follow us on all of our socials linked in the description.